Began in the 12th century with an adventurous French knight.
June 1944. The D-Day landings in Normandy mark the beginning of the end of World War II. They're also the most significant moment in the history of a great Highland clan.
The story of Clan Fraser began when a French knight named Fraser left Normandy in the 12th century for a new life in Scotland.
His descendants would become one of the most powerful Highland clans, renowned for their ferocious fighting spirit.
The Frasers' 900-year-long journey came full circle when Simon Fraser, the 25th clan chief, landed back on the beaches of Normandy, walking in the footsteps of his ancestors.
The history of the Highlands and Islands has been forged by war. Through the ages, kilted clan warriors gained a fierce reputation for their unwavering loyalty and steadfast courage in battle. I'm making a personal journey beyond the myths and the tartan to uncover the real story of Scotland's Highland clans. A reminder of their long and distinguished military history can be seen in the pageantry of events like the Inverness Tattoo.
Of the mass, pipes and drums.
Centuries before the modern British Army came into being, the Highlands were already a warrior society. Each clan was like a regiment, and bound together by ties of honour and kinship, these bands of brothers could be quickly mobilised in times of conflict.
In the 18th century, the British government recognised that the once feared kilted clansman was superbly qualified to become the shock troops of an expanding empire.
Among the first to enlist were the Frasers in 1758. Now, what makes this so remarkable is that just a decade earlier, this clan, which was one of the most powerful and influential in all the Highlands, had actually been fighting against the British Army.
At the height of their powers, the Frasers controlled the rich lands to the west and south of Inverness. Their spiritual home was in Beaulieu, where their Norman ancestors had settled in the 13th century. But my journey into the history of this famous Highland clan begins in the 21st century with a very different kind of Fraser campaign. Today, Simon Fraser, the current clan chief, is fighting plans to erect massive pylons that would carry electricity cables across his ancestral lands. In Beaulieu, I asked Simon how the battle was progressing.
It's going to be a Beaulieu to Denny line. It's going to be the 165-foot pylon, and that is 3 times higher than an average tree in Scotland. Every power generation facility north of Beaulieu runs into the switching station, which is here at Balbelin. So this is the route here.
And that's going through what was the ancestral Fraser lands.
This is all ancestral Fraser land. I mean, this is something that's going to affect Scotland, and once these pylons go up, they're never going to get taken down. They're going to be motorways of pylons. They're going to be going from the north of the Highlands through the whole way down through the Cangles National Park and areas of extreme natural beauty.
Why are you so passionate about this?
Well, my personal role in all this is I have a voice in the Highlands, and people are, you know, by the nature of my past. And I feel I can do something about it.
So this is a campaign that you're fighting personally now, because your family have got a long history of fighting campaigns. Do you think this fighting tradition built up by Clan Fraser has served them well?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. No, it's a romantic and rich, colourful history. I think the Frasers have always fought hard for what they believe in. Right or wrong, that's irrelevant. I think people admire that. You see it even today. People really feel passionately about belonging to this this larger sort of romantic ideal of a clan with military background. They love the idea of fighting. I think it's a remarkable history we've got. It's 1,000 years of history, and there's few things more romantic than the clan ideal.
But 250 years ago, belonging to a Highland clan could be a matter of life or death. In the 18th century, the Frasers became involved in a violent struggle for control of the British Crown.
It's hard for us to imagine today, but back in 1745, the Frasers were actually enemies of the state after their chief came out in support of a rebellion that almost changed the course of British history. It was a decision that would cost Clan Fraser dearly.
In 1745, Bonnie Prince Charlie landed on the west coast of Scotland. A year later, his military campaign to restore the Stuarts to the British throne came to a bloody climax. Culloden Moor lies just a few miles east of Inverness. It was here, on this rough, boggy ground, that Clan Fraser faced a government army intent on crushing the Highland clans that had come out in support of the young pretender.
The Battle of Culloden ended in total defeat for Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Jacobite army. In less than an hour, over 1,300 clansmen were slaughtered here, including many, many Frasers. And in the bloody aftermath, their bodies were unceremoniously dumped in these mass graves.
The Frasers who fought and died at Culloden had answered the call of their clan chief to join the rebellion of 1745. In the years before the battle, Simon the Fox climbed to the very top of British society. I want to know why this wily Highland chief decided to risk everything by backing Bonnie Prince Charlie. Author and historian Sarah Fraser believes the answer can be seen in two contrasting portraits, one of a young Simon and the other a caricature of the rebel he became.
Two portraits of the most notorious member of the clan, Lord Lovat of the 45.
Simon the Fox.
Simon the Fox. This is before he became what someone has called the last and oldest of the great Scottish Celtic chiefs, and the other one is when he is. So what I quite like about it is there anything in this that would show you who he was going to become and why? And
What kind of character was he? I mean, he's called Simon the Fox. Is there a reason for that?
there came to be a reason, and I think initially it's because he was a thwarted man, because he wasn't born to be the chief. He was the second son of the second branch.
So how does he become clan chief?
Due to a series of deaths from which he benefited, he suddenly found himself propelled up the family tree to becoming the male heir. Except for one thing, the late Lord Lovat had daughters, and the oldest of these was the female heiress. Her family intended her to marry someone else and control the Frasers through her, and Simon wasn't going to have any of that.
So this is all about Simon trying to become clan chief?
Precisely, yes. He decides he'll forcibly marry the mother of the heiress, and he tells her the good news, and she refuses him. So what he does is bring in a parson, and one of the records says the lady not being willing, the parson was called for and the bagpipe blown up to drown her screams of consummation, and he forces a marriage with her.
Sounds like rape.
Yes, it is and it isn't, because afterwards, when her family try and retrieve her, she doesn't want to go. She wants to stay with him. And through all the law cases, which they do bring against him, she won't testify. But she agreed to live with him, was happy to live with him afterwards.
But he seems a very ambitious man.
Yes.
He's very focused. He's got a lot to prove.
He has got a lot to prove, and he is the heir and he will become the chief.
Sarah, shall we go and have a look at the other portrait?
Yes, let's, because this is the whole point. This is a portrait of Simon Lord Lovat in the last year of his life, and this is who he has become to the British people by this time. And that face is full of character. He got to the pinnacle of society. George II was godfather to his daughter. He was the sheriff of Inverness. After all that early struggle to become the great chief, to become a great British peer, to be somebody in both societies, British society and medieval Celtic clan society, disastrously, it causes consternation. Bonnie Prince Charlie arrives on the west coast of Scotland and the last Jacobite rebellion starts up.
So, to come out in support of the rebellion and Bonnie Prince Charlie, that must have been a really difficult decision for him.
I think it was very difficult. I think he has been out for the Stuarts all his life. Bonnie Prince Charlie represents an independent Scotland, to Simon at least, and to many of the clans. Nevertheless, he has everything to lose. This is an establishment man.
So he's committed, despite himself, but his decision will really be disastrous for the clan, will it not?
Oh, completely. Yes, yes. It was said afterwards that the government left not so much as a cock to crow the dawn of day afterwards. They devastated his lands. Everything of his was either sold off or destroyed. His estates were forfeit. It could have destroyed the clan completely.
After the Battle of Culloden, countless Frasers lost their lives as British troops laid waste to their lands. The government was determined to prevent the clans from rising again and directed its wrath at the very heart of Highland culture.
Speaking Gaelic, playing the bagpipes, wearing tartan, all became punishable by hanging. But above all, Highlanders were forbidden to carry arms. Now, this brutal campaign was designed to destroy the clan system. From a 21st century perspective, it seems to me like ethnic cleansing.
Simon the Fox was now a rebel on the run. But there was nowhere to hide, and the Fraser clan chief was soon captured. Taken to London, he was found guilty of treason and condemned to death, becoming the last man to be beheaded at the Tower of London in 1747.
The last moments of Simon the Fox were a public spectacle. Just before the executioner's axe fell, an audience stand collapsed, crushing and injuring the crowds. Now, this so amused the Fraser clan chief that he burst into hysterical laughter. He was still laughing when they cut his head off. And this is the origin of the phrase, quite literally, to laugh your head off.
Wardlaw Mausoleum, just a few miles from Beaulieu, is the burial place for the Lords of Lovat, chiefs of Clan Fraser.
Well, this really is impressive. Inside the memorial are plaques on the walls to various members of Clan Fraser, but taking centre stage is this memorial. To the memory of Thomas Lord Fraser of Lovat, this monument was erected by Simon Lord Fraser of Lovat, his son. Now that's Simon the Fox, who, likewise having undergone many and great vicissitudes, he in the end, at the head of his clan, forced his way to his paternal inheritance with his sword in his hand and relieved his kindred and followers from oppression and slavery. Now, what's really interesting about this is it says so much more about Simon the Fox than it does about his father. Simon clearly saw himself as a great hero, a great clan chief, and wanted everyone to know it. Beneath the memorial is this massive trapdoor that leads to a private burial chamber. Now, rumour has it, this is the final resting place of Simon the Fox. It's an uncomfortable feeling being amongst the dead. The official line is that Simon was buried where he was executed at the Tower of London, but some people believe his body was smuggled back here to Beaulieu. It's eerie to think that one of these lead coffins may contain a headless corpse, but the intrigue is certainly fitting for one of clan history's most notorious characters. Culloden was a total disaster for Simon the Fox and his clan. Not only had he paid the ultimate price with his life for supporting the Jacobites, but his son and heir was thrown into prison. And with the confiscation of their ancestral lands by the British state, Clan Fraser seemed like a spent force.
The next chapter in the history of Clan Fraser would begin with yet another death. The Highland clans were desperate to restore their fortunes, but their estates were now being run by government factors, men without ties of kinship to the people who lived on the land they managed. When rents were due, non-payers were evicted by force if necessary.
Colin Campbell of Glenure was one of these government factors. Now, managing forfeited Jacobite estates in the heart of the Highlands was a dangerous business. And Colin Campbell wasn't just unwelcome, he was a marked man.
Having spent the 14th of May 1752 collecting rents, Campbell was travelling through the district of Appin near Ballachulish. As he made his way through these woods, he was shot in the back by a mystery assassin. This cairn marks the spot where he fell. The murder of Colin Campbell would mark the beginning of an astonishing comeback that would see Clan Fraser climb to the very top of the British establishment.
Now, the fact that the murder victim was a Campbell is deeply significant. Having been on the winning side at Culloden, the Campbells were effectively ruling Scotland on behalf of the British state, and they weren't going to let the murder of one of their own kind go unpunished.
The government arrested an innocent man. The trial of James Stewart of the Glens is one of the most shameful miscarriages of justice in Scottish history. I'm meeting author James Irvin Robertson to learn how the Appin murder trial gave Simon Fraser, son of Simon the Fox, the chance to resurrect Clan Fraser.
James, in what way was the Appin murder significant in the rehabilitation of the Frasers?
The Appin murder in itself was significant because a minor government official got killed by a heavy in the woods, which in normal times wouldn't be a big deal. But the government was terrified of Jacobites. They were terrified of a resurgence. Bonnie Prince Charlie was lurking around. So the government thought, we have got to put a stake through the heart of Jacobites and their whole philosophy. So we will have a show trial. We will swamp the place with soldiers, get some poor mug up as the victim and string him up and make a big deal about it so everybody is terrified of us and never gets going with Jacobites again.
What was Simon Fraser's role in the trial?
After Culloden, Simon the Fox had his head chopped off. Simon the son, who was leading the clan troops, very reluctantly, was faced with the job of rehabilitation. He spent a very, very short time in prison, mainly because I suspect he was on the government side all the way along. He became an advocate when the trial of James of the Glens for the Appin murder came up. It was a huge show trial. It was proving, the government was using it to prove that Jacobitism was dead. And Simon clearly lobbied very hard. He'd only just been qualified. He lobbied very hard for the job on the prosecution side.
Honour doesn't really come into this picture very much, does it? He was a turncoat.
Any clan chief worth his salt will turn his coat when the interests of his clan are at heart.
What happened during the trial?
Fraser would stand on his hind legs in front of the world and say that the murder was a barefaced insult to His Majesty's benign authority on this realm. And so everybody applauded, and he proved himself to be the most supportive of all the government supporters.
And what happened to poor old James Stewart?
James Stewart was found guilty of being an accessory to murder, and he was hanged right there, where the bridge now joins that little bit of cliff. And there his body swung at the end of its rope for quite some time until his skeleton rotted and fell to pieces, and then they wired it up again. And he swung for a bit longer before he eventually fell through the grills on the gibbet and was collected up in little pieces and buried in his family graveyard.
A grisly reminder of the evils of Jacobitism.
A grisly reminder of how barbaric people were in their days, I think, is probably better.
Simon Fraser's obsequious performance at the Appin murder trial had put his clan firmly on the road to recovery. Although the government remained deeply suspicious of the Highland clans, it was still prepared to use them to serve its own ends. From the middle of the 18th century, Great Britain became involved in a succession of colonial wars, and the Highlands became a massive recruiting ground for the British Army.
In order to build an empire, the British state became a colossal war-making machine, and to satisfy its demand for ever greater numbers of men, it turned to the Highland clans. Now, this gave the opportunistic Simon Fraser the perfect way to impress his new masters.
historian Andrew McKillop is taking me to Cameron Barracks in Inverness. It's here that thousands of Highland soldiers began life in the British Army. Just 11 years after their defeat at Culloden, the Frasers won a number of decisive victories that helped expand Britain's empire. Following their example, other former Jacobite clans were quick to join up. Military service would dramatically transform the fortunes of both the chiefs and their clansmen.
Andrew, the Battle of Culloden wasn't the end of the great Highland military tradition, was it?
Far from it. If anything, all that happens is that the state takes over the management of it. The British state has an awful lot of manpower needs. It's fighting major wars in Europe, and of course it's got its empire to look after. Under those circumstances, the need for manpower is so acute that effectively the government turns to ex-Jacobite leaders like the young Lovett and offer them commissions to raise regiments for manpower, almost primarily for service in North America. And when that happens, the experiment works very effectively. Lovett is able to raise well over 500 men in a matter of 3-4 days, and that's pretty unprecedented. It kind of confirms to the government their wisdom of turning to their old enemies for the purposes of mobilising soldiers. For the ordinary clans folk, military service holds out the prospect of either gaining security of tenure and land on the Lovett estates in Scotland, or even better, that after their military service in North America, they will be given land by the government in newly won colonies.
Let's go and have a look inside. Aha, good old-fashioned army barracks. It's very Spartan. But what you're saying, Andrew, is that army life was a very attractive proposition to Highlanders back in the 18th century.
So attractive, in fact, that by the 1800s you have 30 to 40,000 Highlanders in British Army service.
Now, that's an enormous number.
When you think of the fact that the Highlands only has around 300,000 people in it, you're looking at an extraordinary amount of manpower. The fact is the Army's taking over a lot of the roles which were normally associated or had been associated with clanship and the chiefs. But I think at a cultural level, it also enables a society where fighting had always been culturally important for young men. It provides an outlet for that. And also it's changing loyalties. You're seeing a shift away from a very kind of regional sense of loyalty to chiefs and to clans to a wider sense of allegiance to the state. The state becomes, in a sense, the new chieftain.
So how did this affect Simon Fraser's fortunes?
Well, he has an extraordinary successful career. I mean, by 1746-47, he's an attainted rebel. By the time he dies in 1782, he's a major general of the British Army. I mean, you can't get any more establishment than that. He lives in Downing Street in London. I mean, again, there's another irony. And he's a personal friend of the British Prime Minister. I mean, military service has effectively made him an integral part of the British establishment.
So it's kind of arrived, really.
Very much so.
In 1774, General Simon Fraser had risen to such prominence that he was able to secure his ultimate objective, the return of his ancestral lands.
Not bad going for a man who'd spent a year imprisoned in Edinburgh Castle as a Jacobite rebel after the Battle of Culloden. Simon's road to recovery was built on naked ambition and ruthless self-interest, but would never have been possible without the unique fighting qualities of Clan Fraser.
General Simon Fraser of Lovett began a new military tradition. Successive clan chiefs would raise regiments to fight for king and country, recruiting men from their Highland estates to serve the British Empire.
This impressive war memorial in Beaulieu isn't just to the fallen, men who lost their lives in the Boer War in South Africa between 1900 and 1902. It also commemorates the raising of a unique Highland regiment, the Lovett Scouts. And the inscription tells the whole story. Erected by the Lovett Tenantry to commemorate the raising of the Lovett Scouts for service in South Africa by Simon Joseph 16th Lord Lovett. He's a direct descendant of Simon the Fox and Simon the General. Now that's a celebration of a clan chief, a Fraser clan chief, raising a regiment in the 20th century.
Fort George was built following the Battle of Culloden as a reminder of the government's determination to enforce its rule over the Highlands. Ironically, it's now home to a museum dedicated to the Highland soldiers whose ancestors once fought against the state. I want to ask military historian Diana Henderson how the skills of the men who lived and worked on Highland estates were used to create a modern British army.
What do you think the Fraser clan chief's thinking was in recruiting the Lovat Scouts?
Well, I mean, in South Africa, they were fighting a guerrilla war. And if you wanted to fight a guerrilla war, you had to fight it with guerrilla tactics. And in order to recruit men, they needed specialists. They needed people who were good at reading ground, people who were good at shooting, people who were good at observation. And here, Paul, you've got the Lovat Scouts exhibition here in Fort George. And you can see the transition between the old colourful uniforms and suddenly they're into khaki, they're into disguising themselves, they're into guerrilla tactics. These were men who were used to stalking deer and being patient in salmon fishing and all the things that make up Highland estate. And then they carried this on into the First World War, where the Lovat Scouts were used as observers in small groups, and they would go forward, they would recce, they would suss the enemy out, they would creep right forward into the enemy positions. They were very, very skilled men, and it had come from the land, it had come from here in the Highlands.
At the start of the 20th century, the Frasers clan chief had seen that the unique qualities of the Highland soldier could play a vital role in a new age of warfare. The success of the Lovat Scouts in the Boer War and the First World War led to the incorporation of their unique fighting skills into the British Army's elite forces. And by the Second World War, Lord Lovat, the 25th Clan Fraser chief, was playing a key role in training Britain's commandos.
The Highlands suddenly became a very important area for training volunteers. We had 250,000 acres to train over, and we were given as much ammunition as high explosive as was needed for blowing things up and shooting at each other, and we really conducted a war all our own. And the ones who couldn't make it were given the sack and sent back to their regiments.
The elite forces who were trained by this renowned Fraser clan chief are still remembered in the Highlands today. In the 12th century, Lord Lovat's great ancestor arrived from Normandy to settle in Scotland and gave rise to a great Highland clan. Throughout their long history, the Frasers have won and lost on the battlefield, but their name has become a byword for both honour and courage. On the 6th of June 1944, the Frasers' extraordinary military campaign came full circle when Lord Lovat landed on Sword Beach during the invasion of Normandy at the head of his commando brigade.
Lord Lovat had come back to where Clan Fraser had started. The descendant of a Norman knight who'd fought with the kings of Scotland and of Simon the Fox, who'd been executed for treason, was now helping to liberate Normandy. And at his side, his piper played the Lovats' March to War.
Hello, I'm Ellie Crisell with your 90-second update. Pope Benedict has resigned as the head of the Catholic Church. He said he no longer has the strength of mind and body to fulfil his duties. The pontiff is the first to step down in 6 centuries. He'll leave at the end of the month. Romania has acted angrily to claims it's to blame for the horse meat scandal. It's after links to an abattoir there. Meanwhile, Tesco says it's found evidence of horse meat in its everyday value spaghetti bolognese. A man missing in the Scottish Highlands has been found dead. He was one of 6 walkers walkers reported lost in the Cairngorms overnight. 5 were rescued by helicopter. Making it easier for the elderly to pay for their social care, the government wants to cap it at £75,000 in England. It'll be paid for by a freeze on inheritance tax. The world's largest captive crocodile has died. Lo Long was 6 metres long and lived in the Philippines. Experts reckon he was over 50 years old.
Hello, I'm Katrina Shearer with the Scottish headlines. Westminster's published legal advice suggesting an independent Scotland would have to apply to join the EU and the UN. The SNP government says it's breathtaking arrogance. A climber has died and 5 survivors were airlifted to safety in the Cairngorms. Highland police want to know how the group strayed miles from where they were reported to be climbing. And the weather forecast, mainly dry tomorrow with bright and sunny spells, some wintry showers in the east and a cold feel with a brisk